There is no despair in the world. Talk to Hashem for 1 hour every day. Every day of our life, yearn, pray, and make a practical effort to live in Eretz Israel. There's only one necessary path, and that's simplicity. Welcome to the Simple Life Breslov podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am Rebbe Nachman. I got my coffee right here, and I'm ready to go. Thank you for tuning in. This episode is in the merit of Chava Amuna bat Sarah, Leah Nava bat Chava Amuna, Betzalel Moshe ben Chava Amuna, Malka Rivka bat Chava Amuna, Aliyah Zipporah bat Chava Amuna, bat Yechaya bat Chava Amuna, Yosef Simcha ben Chava Amuna, and also for the protection of all the IDF soldiers and for the protection and safe release of all of the hostages. So I'm very excited about this particular topic today. So if you guys have been listening, yesterday I put out an episode about Hibodedut, and I mentioned that I've gone from practice to lifestyle, and it's just something that is a part of who I am now. One of the things I love about Hibodedut is that, yes, it's me and Hashem, but a lot of times I get inspired by something that I read, especially if I'm reading something Rebbe Nachman related, and my mind just goes and goes and goes. So I was thinking about this, like, have you ever started something new, but it got really hard, so you just stopped, right? Like, let's say learning a new Mishnah, learning a new Gemara. Maybe you're wanting to start praying a little bit more, going to Minyan a little bit more. Maybe you want to start, maybe you've never wrapped tefillin a day in your life. Maybe you're starting the process of making aliyah. Right. So I've done that many times where I would start something and then it's just like, it's so hard. So I just quit. And like, for example, I'll be honest, like learning Gemara is very, very difficult. And for those who are listening who may not know what Gemara is basically conversations from some of the greatest Torah scholars about the oral law, the Mishnah, we call it, right? And so these are these incredible rabbis that are having discussions around the oral law of the Torah. And a lot of these discussions are very, very difficult to understand. And especially if somebody didn't grow up in Judaism and they're just learning, you open up a Gemara and you're like, what's happening? So that's happened to me many times where I'm like, man, I'm not even going to read this thing. And so I'll put it off and I'll say, all right, I'll do it tomorrow. Or maybe it's like you have a tough day and you're praying, you're davening, and you're not really feeling it. So you're like, all right, I'll pray with more kavanah tomorrow. And you just keep putting it off until tomorrow. And so I was reading in Rebbe Nachman's wisdom, and it's so amazing. So I came across page 29, and so this is lesson number 14, and it says, no religious experience came easily for the Rebbe. Whenever he served God, he experienced every possible hardship. There's so many stories about Rebbe Nachman's attainments, and I mean, he was able to ascend to very, very high spiritual levels. And he also talks about people think that I was able to attain these levels because I was the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. And he's like, no, that's not it. I was able to get to these levels because I didn't give up. I kept working hard, but I kept falling, and I experienced hardship, but I kept going. And so, for example, like I'm going to read this and maybe I'm hoping that it gives you some encouragement as well. It says, he found it very difficult to sit alone in a special room for several hours, devoting himself to God. At first, this was next to impossible for him, but instead of giving up, he forced himself, overcoming his basic nature by spending many hours meditating in his special room. The same was true of his daily religious obligations. They burdened him like a heavy yoke, and he often felt that they would crush him. His difficulties were unimaginable, but the Rebbe discovered a way that enabled him to bear even the heavy yoke of his devotion. Each day he would say to himself, this is the secret right here, I have only this one day. I will ignore tomorrow and all future days. I have only this one day alone. In this manner, the Rebbe was able to bear the yoke of his devotion for that day. Only when that day's devotions were finished would the Rebbe accept the next day's responsibilities. This was the Rebbe's way. And I just found that so encouraging because I don't know about you guys, but there are lots and lots of times where I'm not focused on today. I'm thinking about tomorrow. And it's like, if I'm not focused on today, then I'll be lost in tomorrow. And so it's easier. Think about it. It's easier to live in the future than it is to live in the present. Why? Because it's a reality that we create based on what feels good to us or what makes sense to us, right? We live in tomorrow because there's no resistance there. There's no commitment there. I can think about performing a particular act, and if that act appears to be too hard, quote unquote, then I can, quote unquote, quit thinking about it. And then I can just create a totally different scenario. But living and focusing on today requires resilience. It requires commitment. It requires focus. It requires being present in that moment. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges is being able to focus on right there, right in that moment. And if we can take a lesson, again, from Rebbe Nachman's book, his way was focusing on just this one day. I'm going to ignore tomorrow. I'm going to ignore all future days. All I have is this one day. So with that said, I pray that we are all worthy to being able to focus on just today alone and not focusing on tomorrow, next week, or next month. I pray that we are worthy of drawing closer to Hashem today in this moment. And I pray that Hashem gives us strength to be able to push through when times get hard and when we feel like quitting. Stay strong, everybody. I love you all. See you on the next one.